Okay, now we're recording. Cool. Hi and welcome everyone to SIG Cluster Lifecycle, our weekly meeting. Today is the 8th of May, and we have a KubeCon. With many folks just arrived home from KubeCon. It was an exciting week with lots of discussion in the hallway and also good content on the keynotes and normal sessions. Today we have, first off is Ivan on the topic of upstreaming KubeADM dint cluster as discussed at KubeCon. Feel free to take it away.
Thanks. We discussed it a little bit with Timothy on at Heptio booth on KubeCon. The idea is that, as far as I understand, the cluster lifecycle leads are willing to upstream KubeADM DND cluster, moving it to Kubernetes 6 repository. Yeah, just in case if someone is wondering what this project is, it's about running multi-node Kubernetes test clusters with just Docker, and it's based on KubeADM. It's, for example, used by Cisco folks from SIG Network for their IPv6 work. And well, there's hope that if the project is upstreamed, then maybe more people will be able to participate in it, because there are things that we at Mirantis don't have enough resources to complete, like, for example, rewriting shell scripts in Go there. Well, the question is that confirmed that we should proceed with upstreaming this project, and if so, which steps should be taken?
From the steering committee perspective, as long as the SIG is okay with sponsoring it, which I have no objections to. So I think what you should probably do is write up an email to SIG Cluster Lifecycle and send it around. But the only constraint that you need to add there is who is going to be in the owner's files. And that's pretty much all there is to it. We do need to set up automation on it if we want automation. So that's all there is now at this stage. We just need to make sure that the SIG is okay with sponsoring it and that there's a listing of owners who are responsible for it.
Okay, I'll send an email to the SIG cluster lifecycle describing it. Sorry, I didn't hear properly. Who needs to be in owner's files? That's what should be clear, right?
I think the SIG maintainers, the TLs and chairs, should probably be in that list, as well as anyone from Mirantis who's willing to spend cycles to do reviews and whatnot as they come in. I do know that there have been a number of PRs that have gone into it that have kind of stalled. So I think once we can get that a proper home that other people can okay it, we can get some of those PRs in.
Okay, sounds good. Also, I will mention this in email. We need maybe a few more confirmations from our management in Mirantis. It will be done shortly. And another thing is about if we agree on it all, how do we move it to Kubernetes 6 repository? Because, well, if maybe there's a way to do it directly, like granting very temporary permission to Mirantis, it would be a bit easier from standpoint of coordinating it with our administrators.
Sure. I'd have to get a very specific user account to grant you ACLs, the Kubernetes 6 repo, for a very short period of time. So we can coordinate that separately. It looks like Justin wants to say something. Because
something that's come up a bunch is the CLA. Can you, as a member of the steering committee, clarify the status of code that is not necessarily under the CLA yet?
Everything that will be in Kubernetes SIGs will have to abide by the CNCF CLA. So that's one of the constraints, right? So if anyone wants to contribute to it, they have to sign the CNCF CLA. So the same as all of Kubernetes proper. The other constraint is that it needs to have, you know, some reasonable-ish open source license. Apache 2 is fine. You know, I know that there's a couple other licenses that are currently supported within the CNCF, but that's pretty much it.
But the existing code, does it
The
have
code,
to?
The code, if it's Apache, doesn't matter. Apache 2.
They don't have to retro. So the contributors do not have to. The existing contributors do not have to retroactively CLA their contributions.
No, that's not what we've been told. I've never heard of a retroactive CLA before. So long as the donating company, whatever company is donating, has sign off on the new CLA, then it blanket applies.
Yeah, I think it should be okay. There should not be such problems with CLA.
Right.
So will it be moved like as is, all the code the same, or will it, and with Git history, or will it be some kind of rewrite first or some adaptation, or is it just like a A/B move?
I thought we just move it, and then maybe there will be chance we can improve it, including right and everything else that can be done after that, because quite a lot of people are already using this project, and
yep. So the way it's worked for other things that got donated was it just transfers ownership and all the history is maintained. So it's worked on a couple of different projects. I helped transition Poseidon over, which is a separate scheduler by Cambridge, and we got that into the Kubernetes SIG repo without issue. So.
Cool. Any other thoughts, comments from the group? Okay. Then Ivan will send an email to our mailing list, and I guess there will be lazy consensus on the proposal, and I guess we should try to acquire +1 from the SIG leads or similar, and then we'll just move it in. Sounds cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And next up, Chuck, regarding kubeadm images, a top-level command or a subcommand of config.
Yep. So that's kind of what I would like to get is any feedback on this PR I have open for kubeadm images, which will list the Docker images that kubeadm uses for an install. Over the past couple of weeks, I've seen a good number of people talking about installing in an air-gapped environment and having a command to list all of the images they need before they run kubeadm would be really helpful. So it's just a matter of, do we want it at the top level or do we want it as a subcommand? And then I have a link in there just to some Stack Overflow that I found from Joe Beta outlining this command like 4 years ago.
So the one comment I have is that we're missing, and especially as we go forwards with config changes, we're going to definitely need like a config subcommand, like config edit, config describe, and config other things. Config generate was one of the ones, because it's not clear for power. We want to make it simpler for power users who want to have the escape hatch of generating a config and being able to twiddle everything that they need to twiddle. And it sounded to me like images was a portion of config or would apply to, but that's not strictly true. It's like there's a Venn diagram, there's an overlap of it, but it's not wholly consumed by. So I don't have strong opinions other than I know that there will be a config subcommand. I don't know if this makes sense to break out as a separate one or to keep it into its own.
Yeah, so the current kubeadm config commands we have is config upload and config view. And that's just like, if you want to create, or if you want to have an easy way to change the config map in the cluster, you can use kubeadm config upload. And if you want to just, instead of typing kubectl get with a lot of parameters, you can do kubeadm config view. As Tim said, they are pretty basic right now, these commands. So in order to actually serve the users we want, we will make them more sophisticated. I think kubeadm config images would be, or list images would be perfectly fine, as the actual output there is dependent on the config map itself, because we can't say, we can't hard code this for every kubeadm installation. Instead, it's dependent on a lot of factors. So having that under config seems very reasonable.
I had like config list images inside of the chat window as a possible option. And then it could take into account all of the overrides and whatnot that you have provided.
Yeah, Tim, you said before that if in the Venn diagram that images wasn't under config. Which part of listing images do you feel like isn't part of config? Because in my mind, it does fall pretty squarely underneath config, because it's the config that kubeadmin will use, and it's also maybe config you can set an override that kubeadmin will use, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's more of a UX like Venn diagram that I'm thinking of, because from a user's perspective who wants to understand how where the images are being pulled from, it's super transparent to have a top level command, but it's also very onerous to maintain the top level commands for all the things. So it does make sense logically to have it under config in my mind, but I don't, from a UX perspective, there's definitely like a cleaner feel for like having a top level command. But
yeah, I don't know the scope of config. Like what does the top level config command do? And like,
so
it seems like it's related to uploading config maps, and that's not quite.
Yeah, so basically making it easier for the user to handle the configuration of kubeadm, which will at least at this point in time store in our config map. If we ever transition to CRDs or whatever, that's going to be handled transparently. Same UX, but yeah, it's based. And as Tim said, we might want to do a generate or something for those who don't want to go to Kubernetes IO/docs and check the reference YAML from there. You can easily do like, this is the default for everything, and override it as you like.
Mm-hmm.
So the one thing that seems odd to me is that I wouldn't necessarily expect a command nested under config to perform some type of a operation other than if we're updating the config in the cluster. And if this is going to be used to actually like be able to potentially pre-pull images in addition to just listing images, then would we have, like list images lives separately under config and then have like a pull images live underneath the different top level command?
So I don't think we're ever gonna do pre-pull just like that, or at least I wouldn't expect it, because that's really up to what CRI implementation you're using. So as we can't really choose or favor a specific one, I think it's easier to just, if we have this this list images command or something, it should be easy enough for these power users to do a like bash for loop or whatever and do that thing.
Go ahead, Craig.
Won't you have the same issue with the image names? I mean, between CRI runtimes, you might not have the same image names.
What are you talking about? The Docker images for whatever should be the same across CRI runtimes. Like if I say registry location image version, the listing of the image won't matter, but the command I would use for pulling would be different.
Okay, how are we going to, aren't those all coming from GCR today? They're going to have different names depending on the CRI, right?
The names don't change by CRI.
And I think what Tim is saying is the names still have the same structure, right? You might want to override they're coming from GCR or they're coming from Quay or Docker Hub or some other image registry. But the name of referencing an image in a registry looks like the same format from wherever. So
okay, yeah, I was thinking of the fully qualified URL, but okay, that makes sense.
Right, but if you're using a different CRI, you're going to have to override the images you want to use and then pre-pull those, right? Or you just override them and kubeadmin will pull them when starting things if you're not air-gapped.
Yeah, and list images will make it easier for you to know which exact ones to pull. I think this is fine, and if we could always start with list images under config, and if we ever think that should be a top-level command, we can rearrange that later.
Cool. Yeah, that's fine with me.
Caleb?
You said not to pre-pull. For those working in an air-gapped environment, pre-pulling would actually be beneficial because you'll have to rename, you have to put them all in your own registry anyways, and they'll all have to be renamed. So getting them all at once, using the bash for loop is probably just fine. But if you want to make it as easy as possible for those in an air-gapped scenario, you're right. If I wasn't an air-gapped, pre-pulling can be difficult. But if I'm in an air-gapped, then I'm going to have to pull them all anyways and push them into a registry. So pre-pulling them will be just fine because I'm going to have to re-tag them and put them into my own registry anyways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you're still going to have to write a bash for loop to push them to your registry. So why can't you have that loop pull and push, right? If you're going to have to write custom code to jump across the gap, I think what Lucas is saying is that if we write that code in kubeadmin, then we are sort of by default picking which types of images we are going to write code to pull down. Right? Like we know how to pull Docker images, we know how to pull Rocket images, we know how to pull whatever else, and maybe there's another container runtime that's not supported, and we then have to make the choice of do we add support for that to try to be fair across all the
image that
runtime.
you're pointing at?
Say that again?
Wouldn't it just be the image that's referenced? It wouldn't matter, whatever one you reference isn't it? The reference isn't changed based off the CRI, right? It's if I'm using Rocket, then if I reference a Rocket image, then that's what's going to pull regardless of whether I change later.
It's the code. It's the code inside of kubeadm. So the code inside kubeadm would have to have a different thing. So if it's going to pull, it's be a Docker pull for Docker. For whatever CRIO, I don't even know what it is. It's something else. So that changing of CRI pull command, that piece, whatever you're using to pull, would have to change based upon the CRI. And listing of images just makes us say we don't care. We throw up our hands. Then you can pipe the output of that into whatever command line tool you're using for your CRI environment to then get the local images. So I think the explicit punt makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Well, and certain runtimes also have the ability to use different on-disk representations of the image as well.
I think I have enough information to go forward. I don't want to take up too much time.
I was going to ask here, do you expect more commands to go under images?
No, I didn't anticipate any subcommands under images.
Okay, cool. I think we could go to the next one. Master config by Liz.
So I threw under the bus here, Liz, to just do a PSA about the master config so we can talk about it again, Liz, some other time.
What am I doing? They're a bus.
So I'll do the update. Liz has a PR or a cap up for talking about master config because we got bitten by it super hard in 110 to have a well-versioned component config for kubeadm. And folks should lend their eyeballs towards that, and we should have a discussion at a later date once we've had enough cycles to think about the details of what we want to put in what could potentially be a V1 Alpha 2 for either a 111 or a 112 release. But this is, in my opinion, this is possibly the most important thing for us to address in the near term, given some of the issues that we have run into in the 110 cycle.
Tim, you sound pretty wishy-washy on timeframes there. Like 110 versus 111 is a pretty big jump. Is this important enough for 111? Do we want to set a deadline for people to review the gap and say, again, back to lazy consensus, everybody's got a week or two, and after that, we're going to address comments and move forward?
I'm cool with that. I would ideally like to get this in place for 111, just at least to get hard versioning in place, and then we can iterate or add fields. I want to have the explicit list today. It won't be complete, and that's why we call it V1 Alpha 2, but at least to have the hard versioning in place for 111 because of how much pain and suffering it costed us in 110. So.
Yeah, I think the only worry and why Tim was like either way is that code freeze is, did we say the 29th? I think, or something like. It's pretty soon, and this is a major thing. I tried to do it once before, like in last fall or something. Updating the API types is hard, and specking out, getting them really right is hard. Probably like 2 weeks of work at least, and then actually making Kubed internally use the new structs and stuff is also taking a lot of time. Like it's basically touching the whole code base, which is maybe 10,000 lines. So
kubeadm already uses a separate internal struct that is not versioned. So we don't need to change all of the internal stuff. We just need to write, well, we don't even need to write the converters because they already exist and we already use them. What we need to do is just do some enforcement around making sure that the versions exist and are set. They could be set right now, we just aren't, and we're not using them. All of the structs have the type meta embedded, which means they could have a kind and they could have a version, but it's just not there.
Okay, I thought we would update both the internal and the external structs. Okay. Then doing just the external is less time consuming, which is good.
Yeah, I think for V1 Alpha 2, we don't even need, I don't think there are any particularly major changes we have planned. I think we just want to have a version so that we can reduce so we start going forward, don't have this problem.
We can leverage API machinery on component config and not care. That's the whole purpose of leveraging API machinery. In my mind, it is. Other than that, it's a heck of a lot of tooling.
So I think we have done that like from nearly the beginning at least. But the problem with the 110 thing was that we referenced a kube proxy external API type component configuration, but then there were changes in that external type from 1.9 to 1.10, which is without an API bump change, which is something that never should happen. So then we bypassed all the nice conversions features
My
of the API
proposal
machinery.
for that, which I think I did not do a particularly good job of elucidating, was that we should make copies of all of those structs that we depend on, and hang on to and take those under our own ownership, and then write methods that convert from our internal things to the external structs that the proxy and the other things expect. Because if we do that, then we can have the compiler enforce the type signatures matching. And we will know that nothing will change behind the scenes. That was what I was trying to suggest in my CAP, but I was kind of out of it last week, so maybe I didn't do a great job.
So I think the TLDR, if you step back, because we've got other things to go through, is that take a look at the CAP. We'll try to talk about it more maybe next week once folks have had time to discuss it. And as Robert mentioned, we want to make traction to at least have some level of MVP for well-defined versioning in the 1.11 cycle if possible.
Okay, cool. Next up is Liz CA Opinionator.
Yeah, this is me again, and this time I asked to be on here. Tim didn't just throw me under a bus. So there is a way to use an external CA with KubeADM rather than just having KubeADM generate all of the certificates, but the documentation is practically non-existent, and our existing implementation is not particularly user-friendly. Basically what happens is we check for the presence of every single certificate, generate a bunch of error messages about which certificates are missing, and then discard all of those nice error messages. And if we didn't find every single thing, we proceed as if we didn't find anything, and then we encounter weird errors because files already exist and files don't already exist. There's no intentionality to it. So my question is, what is the behavior we want to have around this? It's probably going to be one of if we see a root CA that already exists and we don't see a key, then we look for all of the component configuration and decide whether it exists. Or if we see the CA, don't see the key, and don't see all the other things, we plow forward, trampling on everything, and spit out a bunch of error messages or warnings saying, hey, we tried to use this, but we couldn't, so we continued anyway. Is that clear to everyone? I have a PR open somewhere that I also talked about this on, but that's the basic thing I want to solve. When should we attempt to use an external CA, and what should we do if we don't have all of the things that we need to make that external CA usable?
So I think the desired behavior is for the external CA feature is that if the CA cert exists along with all other client and serving certs, I think they're all client certs actually,
There's a couple,
but not the CA key. So if we have everything that KubeADM cert generation would do, minus the CA key, we can proceed. As we know that everything's there for KubeADM init to run smoothly, but we don't have the CA key, so then we don't just enable the CSR signer, which would be run inside of the cluster, because that's something you're going to do yourself.
So I think the issue with that approach, which is the current approach right now, is you don't get like right now you don't get notification of what you're missing. You just get an error message saying that the key file doesn't exist, and you can't create the certs that you're trying to create. I think what we really need to do is trigger external CA mode if we see a certificate cert without the key, but then have a pre-flight check that verifies that all of the expected certificates that we need are present. And if they're not, we should fail at that pre-flight step to tell the user what certificates they need, and preferably give them some guidance on, how to create, but not necessarily how to create those certs, but what are the prerequisite for those certs, if there's a specific common name or organization needed in the subject, that type of thing.
Yeah, I have a bunch of documentation about the certificates that are required. I'm working with Jennifer, that's her GitHub handle. I'm working with Jennifer to get those into the main Kate's website. So that's one part of this. The other part is just the error messages. And to be clear, we are talking about over a dozen files that need to be named exactly correctly. Getting this right is non-trivial, and just doing one thing if everything is already perfectly correct and otherwise plowing forward blindly, I think is not the right way forward.
Cool. Yeah, we could definitely use more both documentation and pre-flight checks around it before, so we can write nicer user messages.
So I think the best path forward is if we see the CA cert already existing, then we try to do, then we will go into external CA mode and throw a bunch of error messages if everything isn't there that we expect.
As a pre-flight check.
Yeah. Does that sound like a good idea to everyone? There are some edge cases that does bring up. For example, right now, if you decide if you don't want to use, there's middle grounds right now. Like if you throw in just an existing external CA and an external CA key, Kubernetes will use all of those. And so if we don't have a key, if we do see the key, we should probably not try to use external. There's too many states.
Yeah, so like I think if we see the cert but not the key, that should be, that is the external CA thing. And then we must require all of the generated client certs and give good output. We don't give good output at this time. If we see both the CA cert and the key, that means that your company probably have some kind of custom CA they want to use. So then we should use this cert and key to generate all the rest of the things. That are the two happy paths. And in the normal happy path, there's nothing. So KubeADM will first self-sign and generate the CA, both the CA cert and key, and the rest of the things. So those are the three paths and use cases we have.
So basically, the decision tree looks like: is there a CA cert? If no, then we just generate everything. If yes, is there a CA key? If there is, then we use that CA key and generate everything using that. If no, then we look for all of the certificates, and if that's successful, we continue. If not, we throw an error. That sound right?
Yes,
all right.
That's right.
There is one other curveball in there as well, in that we will not clobber existing certificates. So if certificates already exist, we will just use what's already there. And I think I don't see an issue with that behavior as long as that certificate that already exists is valid for the CA that's there.
Yeah, we should have such code in there, but I can't guarantee it's totally bug-free. So we might use some vetting there.
If some of the certs are there, but not all of them, and we can generate them, should we tell the user that we're reusing existing certs? Should we overwrite them? Or should we stop and tell the user they should have none or all of them? I think it's confusing if they have a subset of the certs and we blindly use them and add more, or overwriting them. Like, neither of those seem obvious.
So I think if they provided us the private key for the CA, then they intend for us to actually generate certificates. So I don't see an issue with us generating the certificates, but I do agree that we probably need to provide some output to the user on whether we're reusing an existing certificate or whether we're generating a missing certificate in that case.
We do that today. The reason I see your point, Robert, and it's very fair. Why we did this, like for every single cert key pair, we check, is it there, generate. If it's not, is it there, just go.
Yeah, and I can see, because we keep adding pairs going forward, right? Like someone might say, like, I've generated my API server serving cert, but they forget to generate the various client certs I need, and we should say, oh, you forgot a couple, we'll fill those in for you. Like, that's very convenient. I guess I'm just worried that people might not expect that behavior, right? I guess I'm worried about the obviousness of like what is happening and whether that's expected by users.
So one thing I can say is if a user is comfortable with delegating the private key for the CA to KubeADM and Kubernetes itself, I don't think they're going to go through the effort of pre-creating their certificates before running the install. I think the only case where people are actually going to go through the effort of pre-generating and pre-creating the certificates is where they do not feel comfortable with delegating the key, and where they want kubeadmin and Kubernetes to just consume certificates from the CA and not actually generate certificates.
I think that's mostly true, but I can also see we generate, I think right now, 3 intermediate CAs, one for the front-end proxy, one for user authentication, and a third one that I'm forgetting right now.
etcd.
Yeah, etcd. So like, if some of those exist already, that's another use case I think we want to keep in mind. Like if you haven't supplied the key for the root CA, but you have supplied the key for some of those intermediate CAs, I think the thing to do is to generate those certificates for you.
Okay. Anyway, we have 20 minutes left, so we have
I'll write up a more detailed proposal about what I think we should do, but I feel like I've got some mandate.
Okay. There's also there's a guy from Google who's been poking at the CA stuff in kubeadmin also as part of the cluster API effort, who wasn't on the call today. And if we're going to discuss this again next week, I'll make sure he's here.
Yeah, if you could just point him at me on Slack.
Yes, I pointed him at you on Slack also.
Cool. Proxy versioning summary from conversation upstream. I think we already touched on that. I don't know if Tim's there still, but basically we need. So when we added or embedded the proxy configuration inside of the kubeadm configuration, component configuration that is, we had the promise / we expected it to go beta that cycle as well. It didn't, and it's still in alpha. And then as it was all fight change in backwards compatible manners without bumping the version, which bit us really hard. So going forward, we really need this to be beta, and I hope that's gonna happen for 1.11. And I'm also talking to Tim about it. So the Peter from the SIG has had a PR up for months, more than half a year or something. That graduates all the kube proxy component configuration to beta, but it hasn't got the final LGTM from the SIG. So I hope we can coordinate with SIG networking to actually make this happen for 1.11.
Do you want to sign up for that to work with SIG networking to try and get buy-in from them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also gonna talk to Mike Torfin. So at last KubeCon Austin, I tried to convince the folks there as well. I mean, it's been ongoing all last autumn, but then they said, well, we'll do the kubelet go first. Now the kubelet actually has gone first, and the structs themselves are better. So I hope that means we can do the kube proxy configuration structs.
Well, not everything for the kubelet dynamic configuration is all beta yet. We're still
no, but the structs themselves, which is what we required at this time.
Yes, I'm still not happy with how we're doing the versioning, but I'll leave that for a different conversation. It's not us; it's the whole machination of the other SIGs.
Yeah, and it's the whole community stuff, and that it's possible to do this is probably something we should try to avoid in the future. Like have a bot throw an error message or something. You can't change you can't change struct types between minor versions or something. Anyway, the next one, CoreDNS by default status. Use kubedns as a feature gate in the future. It's breaking change. Thoughts?
So Jason started working on this already, but I saw that CoreDNS is actually not allowed to be made by default now. I can link you with the issue. Basically, somebody posted a comment about this. Just a second. In the chat.
So I know Jason and I chatted about this earlier, in that the SIG networking doesn't necessarily want this to be GA'd yet. And I can totally understand the reasoning for it from a GKE perspective. But at the same point, there are known issues that exist, especially with our deployment of kubedns for anybody using kubeadm in the wild, right? And only GKE is the only provider that deploys the autoscaler that's required for this to make this not suck. So I think defaulting kubedns within a kubeadm deployment while having the flip of the feature gate enabled, so that person can go back to kubedns should they need to, but that would be like it would be a breaking change, but feature gates are okay to break. You know, that's their feature gates. Right? They're not standard API thing, or they're not standard. You don't have to adhere to the standard protocol. So that's my thoughts.
So,
I don't know.
I don't know why we even have to do a breaking change, because if we just go with CoreDNS, we have the feature flag, which is CoreDNS right now. If we set that to being GA in the next version, and it being, or we could even have it beta to conform with the rest of Kubernetes, but just set the default to true, and all the people that want still kubedns will set feature gates to false, CoreDNS to false. Is that what you meant?
That's currently what my PR does. Is it defaults the feature gate to true, and there was another PR that was out there to change it to GA. So I pulled that one into my PR as well. The bigger concern is how do we want to transition from having a feature gate for kubedns or core DNS to having a feature gate to set kubedns instead. And I think, that's something that, one, do we even need that feature gate, or do we eventually just kind of let kubedns kind of die off, or do we have some type of transition plan to remove the core DNS feature gate and add a kubedns feature gate in its place?
I think that just going with the core DNS feature gate is just fine. And as long as the community supports kubedns at all, which is probably like a year or something from now in the future, we'll just have this core DNS flag there still, and you can set it to false if you don't want core DNS, which should be the default for nearly all clusters in the future. If you don't want it, disable it, and there we go. I think
so. There is one
that's the
other
easiest
option
solution.
too, is that we can actually promote it to a config file option as well to make it selectable in the config file with the default of core DNS. And just then we could deprecate the feature flag or feature gate, and we're not having to introduce a new feature gate for kubedns.
I think for 111, the minimum bar is just to default the gate, and then open up a new issue to resolve it in 112. I think seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, and I don't think we even have to move it into the config, because it could all be a feature gate for as long as it lives. And when there isn't an option anymore to even do kubedns, we can remove it after a cycle or two. This is like 1.5 years in the future or something.
Are there any cases where somebody would want to replace the provided DNS solution with a custom one? That would be the case that I would see for having some type of config file option. Like, it's not related to core DNS specifically or kubedns, but recently somebody was asking about being able to deploy without kubeproxy because they want to run something that replaced kubeproxy.
That could be part of the for lack of a better word, it could be a phases. So as long as it is a phase currently, the DNS deployment. So if you could just skip that phase, and that person could just not have that tacked on, right? So
Justin. Oh, sorry.
Right, but we don't currently have an option to run everything except a certain phase, do we? So right now, if you were using the phases, you would have to run through each and every one of the phases manually if all you want is just to skip kind of the add-on installation.
Yes. Justin, you had a question or comment?
I was just going to say I'm hoping, at least in COPS, that we can get this into an add-on, basically pulling it out of COPS entirely, or have it be very, very replaceable depending on how the timing works out. There is a strong use case where people will want to replace it, which is the core DNS will make it easier to do like the daemon set approach for DNS, and there are different sort of approaches that people are talking about playing with in terms of running the future kubedns on every node. But that's one of the reasons we want to try to pull it out of, or at least I want to pull it out of like the core installation, make it more easily customizable.
Yeah. Figuring out an overall generic add-on management would be great. We don't have this problem.
So
sorry, just to jump in real quick on that, Lucas. We do have somebody who is taking that task on now, and I poked him to schedule a meeting sometime soonish with the SIG to like talk about what he's been looking into. He's still ramping up and start proposing some solutions around that. And I think he's been working with Justin too.
I think we have a short-term solution, and we can open up an issue for the long-term, and we'll deal with that the next cycle.
Yeah, I also think this all sounds fine. Really great that we have someone working on add-on management now as well.
Somebody said in that comment I posted that it should be defaulted to 1.12 instead.
So I think there's going to be a small skew between the rest of Kubernetes, where GKE probably is going to be the bar, and us. So we're going to enable it while it's still beta for the whole of Kubernetes, we're going to enable it by default, but in 1.12, it's probably going to be GA for everyone. That means that it's pretty much every cluster is going to be default. So we're just going a bit faster than the rest of the community. Tim has a PSA, and also we're going to talk about the ONS file just for a couple of minutes.
The two PSAs are, one is that ideally we need to have a set of facts for debugging Kubedium when deployments go awry. Most of the issues that get filed, and I do spend a tremendous amount of time triaging these things as of late, deal with people being confused and not understanding the behavior. So if there are folks in the SIG, there's currently 22 people on this call who would like to help with that. That's a great way to get your feet wet on Kubedium, as well as being able to understand the UX experience and how the expectations around it. The second PSA is that to Robert and Lucas, now that you're both back, yay, we need to work on a SIG charter. That needs to get done, hopefully, by the 1.12 cycle. That's all I have for PSAs.
Yeah, cool. So the last thing that we talked about during KubeCon a bit is the ONS file. So revisiting that one again, we're gonna remove Joe Beta as an approver. He has other tasks to do, and now a lot of other Heptio folks are ramping up. So that's really great to see. And I don't know what the status of Chris Rouse is, but from what I saw, he's been active in the Cluster API instead as review. So he's currently a reviewer in our ONS file. Lee has been active in the mentoring program, which is piloted by or led by Paris Pittman from Google. Had a pilot mentoring program that started late last year after Austin, and has now progressed during the winter here, spring. And the outcome of that is that Lee is going to be added as a reviewer after active working and collaboration in the SIG. So that's great. He confirmed on Slack some minutes ago that he's okay with being added and stepping up there. Hopefully, for just generally, we're trying to get more approvers. So, for example, when the time comes, I hope to graduate Lee also to an approver, if we can do that. Jamie said Jamie switched companies. He's now at GitHub, and last time, I just talked to him, and he's not having time for OSS work as much as he had earlier. Hence, we're going to remove him from the ONS file currently. He thought that was okay, and when he has time to come back to the SIG and start contributing, we're going to re-add him. I don't know how it's with Cargakis.
Yeah, I'm in the US files, but I haven't had that much time to do reviews lately.
Okay. Is DMNC Quay here? Or
I haven't seen him active for a very long time. So I think my only comment for anything that gets edited in the owner's files is to do comment out, so that we have history of people who may eventually tread back into this space, right? So I know Jamie doesn't have time now, but he might have time later.
That is a very good point. I'm totally happy to do that. And then graduating Fabrizio to become an approver then instead of Joe Beta makes sense to me. And Fabrizio. And as we talked at KubeCon, he should be fine with that as well. Are the other folks happy with that? Cool. I see a couple of thumbs up. And all this will go on GitHub, of course. So the pull request will, together with this meeting, the pull request will be the source of decision making for a SIG. And lastly, if for example Liz or Chuck or Jason want to become reviewers, I think that should work real well. To do I would be really happy to see that. When thinking about it, I don't remember whether we have official guidelines on how much should you do to do reviewing or whatever. We could probably write a couple of words for that in our charter. I don't know if that's the right place.
That would be the appropriate venue. Yeah.
Sorry.
That would be the right place.
Yeah. So I think we're hoping to make that happen as soon as possible. And I don't know if we should wait for us to write up the charter, or if we just should go ahead. Either way is fine by me. Reviews. I mean, the thing is you can be a reviewer without being in the reviewers file. But it's more about receiving official responsibility or whatever. And I'm personally happy with adding U3.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense in my opinion to go, and if there's any things that we learn, then we can feed that back into the charter when it eventually comes, but we don't want to wait for 6 months, right?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Robert, Tim, happy? Cool. Then I can send a PR in 15 minutes with these changes, and then ask for all the folks' approval that this file touches. And that's it. We're out of time. And I think we had time to discuss all the things we wanted to. Cool. See you all next